On PrimeTime Politics, Pharmacare passed.
This is a big deal and great news for many Canadians.
Adopted by the Senate, Bill C-64 has already received royal assent, but the challenges don't stop there. Coming up, we will speak to MPs about next steps and whether Pharmacare will survive the next election. Also,
none of them expressed any concerns with the process of bringing this before me.
Unanswered questions. Why did it take the Trudeau government 54 days to sign off on a CSIS warrant? Did political considerations compromise national security? We will speak to our journalist panel. And American men say they are more likely to vote for Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. We'll get the view from Washington. This is PrimeTime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Bill C-64, the Pharmacare bill, is now passed, receiving royal assent after a final vote in the Senate Thursday evening.
Those in favor of the motion will please say yay. Yay. Those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Nay. I think the yeas have it.
Now, of course, Pharmacare was a key condition of the now collapsed Liberal NDP confidence agreement. But with its passage, Canadians may soon have some diabetes medications and birth control paid for. But the work is not over. Healthcare is still a provincial responsibility, so deals will now have to be negotiated with the provinces and territories before Pharmacare is a reality in Canadian lives.
This is a measure moving forward on Pharmacare negotiations with the provinces that will help Canadians in their health and help them in their pocketbook. But that's something we need to work on right now. That's something all parliamentarians, if they're listening to the constituents, should be working on. But it's certainly something that my government is going to stay focused on.
Well, let's talk about Pharmacare. Yasir Naqvi is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health. Peter Julian, the NDP House Leader and health critic for his party. We did invite the Conservatives to join us today, but they declined. Hello to the two of you.
Hello, Michael.
Good to be with you.
And you. Mr. Naqvi, I'll start with you. You know, your government has already signed an MOU with British Columbia to make this legislation a reality, but how much longer before we see other provinces signing on as well?
Well, first of all, I think it's really important to recognize what a historic moment this is, that for the very first time in Canada, we have a Pharmacare legislation that has become law. And as a result of that, 3.5 million Canadians will have access to diabetic medication, and 9 million women will have access to contraceptives. That's a huge step forward in the journey of our publicly funded healthcare system. But of course, this is one big step that we have taken. Now the important work begins, as you mentioned in your introduction, which is to work with our provinces and territories to reach agreements with them so that these medications could be provided to Canadians in those provinces and territories. And that's the important work that we are embarking on now. We've already have an MOU signed with British Columbia. They are, of course, going through an election right now. So as soon as the election is done, we will resume that work with the government. But we are also starting and engaging in the conversations with other provinces and territories as well, so that Canadians can have access to diabetes and contraceptives as quickly as possible.
Any indication if any province or territory is going to step forward sooner rather than later?
Well, that work is happening, and of course that work is taking place in earnest as well. But I think what we have to be mindful of as well, and this is where a little bit of my disappointment comes with the NDP. This was important work we did together, and by NDP ripping the agreement with the government, and that's their words, not mine, they really jeopardized this important work moving forward, because we need to make sure that government stays in place till next fall in order for us to finalize these agreements to make sure that Canadians can see the benefit of Pharmacare legislation.
Mr. Julian, I'll get you to answer that, because, you know, yes, these deals must be signed, because without these deals, if there is a vote before they're actually reached, that does seem to suggest that Pharmacare is not safe. Does that mean you're willing to support this government de facto until you see some agreements from the provinces coming around?
Well, first off, it's a bit rich given that all the Liberals voted against Pharmacare bill 3.5 years ago in the House of Commons, presented by the NDP. The Liberals and Conservatives voted against. And it's Jagmeet Singh and the NDP that brought the Liberals finally to acknowledge the Pharmacare Act. You'll recall, Michael, that last spring I had to, as House Leader, basically stop the parliamentary work because the Liberals weren't agreeing to Pharmacare. And the fact that this is now a reality of the law of the land, I think, is vitally important, but it wouldn't have come without the NDP. I mean, the Liberals have always promised and never delivered. The NDP, Jagmeet Singh, and the NDP caucus delivered. Now, the reality is we're talking about a situation that is life-saving. There are hundreds of people that die every year because they can't afford to pay for their diabetes medication and devices. That's according to the CFNU. So the reality is we need to sign these agreements immediately because it's saving lives and making sure that people who have diabetes aren't subject to this burden of finding $1,000 or $1,500 every month just to keep themselves in healthy and alive. And if they can't afford their medication, they end up in the hospital, which means there's a huge cost to our acute care system, which is why the NDP pushed so hard on this. It's a no-brainer. There are a number of provinces that have indicated, as you mentioned, BC, Manitoba, Newfoundland, and Labrador, the number of provinces that are willing to step up immediately. And as the NDP succeeded when we brought in universal health care 60 years ago, it took a couple of years for Conservative provinces to sign on because often they were opposed on ideological grounds. And what happened to those Conservative provinces is that either the government changed its mind or the people of that province changed the government. And that's why Pharmacare will be rolled out. But the Liberal government has to take it seriously and negotiate immediately to put in place these agreements.
But what you're saying there, Peter, that ultimately it did take some time. So does that mean you will give this Liberal government more time to get these deals signed and meanwhile support them in confidence motions? Or is that something you as a party still debating?
No, these are two different issues. No, these are two different issues. We've said we're proceeding vote by vote in terms of the House. We did that during COVID, and as a result of that, Canadians benefited from more supports to families, small businesses, seniors, people with disabilities, students, and of course, workers got their first paid sick leave in Canadian history, all because of the NDP intervening vote by vote. As far as Pharmacare is concerned, those agreements can be signed in a matter of weeks. And we are saying, and Jagmeet Singh said this morning very clearly to the Prime Minister, Liberals have to take this seriously. They will sign the agreements. There will be, I expect, one or two holdouts purely on ideological grounds. But the reality is most Canadians will be benefiting from Pharmacare within a matter of weeks if the Liberals take this seriously and those negotiations are completed with the provinces.
Okay. Now, we did hear Pierre Poilievre this morning, Mr. Naqvi. He says that most people are already covered by private drug plans. Not everyone needs a publicly funded program. So why did this have to be universal rather than income adjusted like dental care? After, right now, your government has a $40 billion deficit on its hands. Why not make it more targeted rather than universal?
Well, these are life-saving medications when it comes to supporting people who live with diabetes or ensuring that 9 million women and gender-diverse people in Canada have access to contraceptives. We think that this should be available to all Canadians. It actually will save them a lot of money as well, which is very important in this moment when there is an affordability crisis. We also know that Pierre Poilievre and his Conservatives don't support public health care. That's why they voted against this legislation as well. And I think that's what at stake also, because if Pierre Poilievre is successful somehow, he will scrap Pharmacare. So I do think that both Liberals and NDP who supported Pharmacare in their respective platforms found common ground. They worked together in the best interest of Canadians. That is a good thing. And now the NDP walking away from it, siding with Pierre Poilievre just to score some political points, it undermines the progress we have made. Of course, we will work with all seriousness as we have been working up to now to get this legislation legislation done by working with provinces and territories and get the deals signed, but it still jeopardizes this whole thing, and it's only going to hurt Canadians and no one else. But we will keep working hard to make sure that Canadians get the pharmacare they deserve.
Okay, Mr. Julian, I have less than a minute. I'll let you answer to that, because, you know, there is this worry about the survival of pharmacare if the Liberals are not elected government next time around.
No, if the NDP is elected government, of course, not only will pharmacare be put into place, but it'll be broadened to cover other drugs. Dental care will be expanded as well. The reality is the NDP has been the motor behind both of these initiatives. And I'll tell you one thing that I find quite reassuring. In my riding, there are a number of seniors that have always voted Conservative. And I've had those seniors, a number of them, say to me, look, I've seen this new dental care program that the NDP put into place. It's helped me personally. You know, I'm going to be voting NDP for the first time in the next election. And so the antidote to Pierre Poilievre is to have those kinds of clear policies put out that actually benefit people. The Liberals have been beholden to corporate interests, corporate landlords, pharmaceutical companies for far too long. The NDP has forced initiatives that are going to make a difference in people's lives, and I think we're going to see that reflected whenever Canadians go to the polls in their choice. They can choose between Pierre Poilievre, who wants to destroy all that, or Jagmeet Singh, who's shown real leadership over the last 2 parliaments and has actually concretely delivered a track record of results that have benefited people.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. I appreciate both of you joining us on this day. Yasir Naqvi, Peter Julian, thank you for this, and early happy Thanksgiving to both of you.
Same to you, Michael and Peter.
Thanks so much. Happy Thanksgiving.
Well, let's go to the public inquiry on foreign interference now, where Bill Blair testified today. Blair is currently the defense minister, but the questions asked of him has to do with his time as the public safety minister. Back in 2021, CSIS wanted Blair to sign a surveillance warrant. The inquiry was not told who that warrant pertained to, but media reports have said it was to survey Ontario Liberal MP Michael Chan, an individual who sat in provincial parliament and who had twice been a cabinet minister in 2 Ontario Liberal governments. It's that political connection that Blair was asked about, lawyers and the inquiry trying to understand why it took 54 days to get that warrant signed when usually it would take about a week.
It was news to me. I'll just simply say that there was any concern, because at no time did the director of CSIS or any of its senior leadership team or the deputy minister or my chief of staff ever suggest to me that there was any issue with respect to bringing that warrant before me on your day 54.
Well, let's talk about this. Robert Fife is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. Joël-Denis Bellavance is the Ottawa bureau chief for La Presse, and Catherine Lévesque is a parliamentary reporter for the National Post. Hello to the three of you.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Hello, Michael.
So let's talk a bit more about Bill Blair, because, you know, his testimony today doesn't really clarify for us what happened in this 54-day period. Of course, there is the suggestion that the warrant was delayed for political considerations. You know, how concerned should Canadians be that perhaps, and this is just perhaps because we don't know 100%, that politics played a role in a matter of national security?
Well, I think it's one that we should take very, very seriously. Normally what happens when a CSIS electronic surveillance warrant needs authorization, it normally takes between 4 to 10 days for a minister to approve it, and it goes off to the federal court. The fact that it sat there for 54 days should be of great concern to Canadians, because the target of that was Michael Chan, a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister, a very key player in the Chinese-Canadian community for the Liberal Party in the Greater Toronto area. He's an organizer, he's a fundraiser. That the fact that not only that the CSIS was targeting him because of really serious concerns about national security and his involvement with the state of China, but there was also on that is what is called a list of people who could be, when these warrants are sent, there's a list of people who could be picked up on the conversations. One would presume that that would be some parliamentarians, potentially some cabinet ministers, or other important Liberal Party officials that would have been potentially picked up if once they began to bug and surveil Mr. Chan. That it sat there for 54 days is shocking. And the former CSIS director, Dick Fadden, said that he's never heard of anything like that. And also the fact that Mr. Blair's chief of staff, Zita Astravos, who used to work in the Prime Minister's office and personally knew Mr. Chan when she worked for Premier Kathleen Wynne in Toronto, was involved in that CSIS warrant. Other CSIS officials who prepared this sort of stuff said she should have recused herself because she knew him personally. Like, you cannot be involved with the target of a CSIS warrant. So I think it's a really serious issue. I don't think we've got any answers from Mr. Blair, who is very, very good at testifying. He's a former cop. Yeah. He's had criminal lawyers go at him. So they didn't really touch him today. He never answered anything. But one thing he made sure of is that he didn't know anything. He's like Sergeant Schultz. Remember Hogan's Heroes? Yeah. So Sergeant Schultz, I know nothing.
I saw nothing. I hear nothing. Well, but to be fair, he says he signed it as soon as it came to his attention. Right. How concerned should Canadians be on this, Catherine?
Well, I think it is concerning because you had a political staffer who was who made sure that CSIS could not do their job correctly, right? And so this sat in the office, and Zita Astravos was aware of this for 54 days, and finally Bill Blair signed it. But during that time, I mean, essentially what we've heard this week is it's a blame game, on all sides. People are pointing fingers at each other, saying, well, it was Bill Blair's chief of staff should have told him. At the same time, Zita Astravos saying, well, CSIS should have said something if they were really worried about this. But essentially, yeah, I agree. Ultimately, I think the big question is, why did the chief of staff, Zita Astravos, why was she sitting on this for so long? Why did she request a briefing and then waited, weeks and weeks to bring it to Bill Blair's attention? Whereas, during that same period, he signed other warrants, in a matter of days. So, I don't think it was because the pandemic was a problem necessarily. I mean, he was able to make decisions.
Which has been raised as a potential reason.
And, I get it was maybe a little bit more difficult to get information, classified information, but at the same time, Bill Blair was able to do his job for other warrants. So why did this one take so much time? I think Canadians should be concerned.
Mm-hmm. The timing of this demand from CSIS for that surveillance mandate is interesting because it was a few months before the Prime Minister actually called an election. So for sure, I think there's a link there that we wanted, maybe that's the suspicion, they wanted to avoid some kind of damaging information being told or spread out, or giving tools to CSIS that could uncover something that would be embarrassing to the government. But clearly, Zita Astravos testified this week. Her testimony was not very clear. In fact, I think she may have hurt himself with that testimony. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the commissioner will say about this whole affair in her final report. She will have to make a statement about that very nature of exchange of information, but also how fast the political leaders, the political masters, acquiesce to demands from CSIS in terms of those mandates. So it's going to be interesting to see her conclusions. That's going to be one of the key elements of her final report, I believe.
Yeah, and of course, because we don't have clarity, there's these still questions: the relationship, the timing. And that's something that we got no clarity on today. So we're going to keep watching that. But I want to pick up on a point that Catherine did mention, Bob, because that is part of the argument that, this was 2021. We were just coming out of the pandemic. The vaccines were just getting rolled out. There were the support payments for individual Canadians and businesses. Does that factor into what we are seeing here, the fact that perhaps it makes it more understandable if they were so overwhelmed with the pandemic that this sat on someone's desk for 54 days?
No, absolutely not. To Catherine's point, the minister approved 2 other warrants within a 4 to 10 day period of time. This is, and you have to understand that CSIS warrants have to be taken very, very seriously. They are highly sensitive and very intrusive. They allow people to break into your house, to plant bugs in your house, on your computers, in your cars, to intercept your mail. These are, and they not only need the minister's approval, they need the approval of a federal court. So this is the sort of stuff that has to be taken very, very seriously because it involves a threat to the security of this country. The fact that this sat there for 54 days is unconscionable, and we still do not have an explanation for why that happened. We do know that Zita was asking questions about CSIS. Who's on the list? She was asking questions about, we don't know who's on the list. We don't know whether it's cabinet minister.
She got a briefing
on it. We know after that briefing, CSIS sent a note to the CSIS director saying, oh, we're concerned here that this might not get approved. So there is a lot of stuff that needs to be uncovered. One assumes that the commission knows a lot more about this than we do, because these warrants are really highly secret. And who are the targets, who are involved, we don't know that.
And she probably has the name of the people on the list.
She would have the name of the people.
So that's
she would have seen the warrant, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll follow that and note the fact that the public portion of the hearings, they end next Wednesday. The Prime Minister is scheduled to appear on the last day. We'll be watching it. This has to be quick, but I do want to ask while you're here, going into this long weekend, Pharmacare is passed by the Senate. It has now received royal assent. Does that possibly move up the timeline for an election? Again, October 2025 should be the date. Nobody believes that's going to be the date. But does the fact that Pharmacare is passed move the agenda forward?
Well, everybody's talking about, is this government going to prorogue? And if they're going to prorogue, does that mean they're trying to avoid an election, or does it also mean that Mr. Trudeau is going to take a walk and announce he's going to resign? There's something very funny going on. We all acknowledge this. There's something.
Everyone's talking about it. Like,
right.
I mean, you go out.
I mean, the government doesn't seem to be doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And even MPs don't know what the hell is going on here, Liberal MPs. So I don't know, we'll have a better idea after the Prime Minister testifies on Tuesday, or Wednesday rather.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see something happening fairly quickly after that, whether it's an election, whether it's prorogation, whether it's a big cabinet shuffle. I don't know, but I smell something.
Okay, you two?
I've heard the three things that Bob just mentioned: a cabinet shuffle, prorogation possibility, Mr. Trudeau resign. That's still up in the air. I don't believe it will happen for Mr. Trudeau. I think he will fight the next election. He made that clear. But for sure, I don't think the political context can allow the government to survive longer in this fall. I think something will have to break somewhere. Either the NDP will say, enough, we need to go to the people and ask them for their verdict, or the Prime Minister himself make something happen so that the gridlock that we're seeing right now is over. But there's currently an impasse, and that parliament that we have right now is not productive, none whatsoever.
I mean, nothing is happening in the House of Commons right now. I mean, we're on the same question of privilege and have been for the last 2 weeks. But also, what we're seeing increasingly, and it's become very clear this week, is that the Bloc Québécois is not going to get the bills that it's asking for and the delays that it's asking for. At the same time, the government, I think, also wants to buy some time, because sure, they just passed the Pharmacare Act, but at the same time, you need time to negotiate with the provinces to actually get some of the things that you want to see before the next election in place.
Well, and to protect Pharmacare, because if these deals are not negotiated and protected and the Liberals don't win re-election.
But I think for the Liberals, especially, they want to see free contraceptives and free insulin. But I think especially the contraceptive part, because they want to put Pierre Poilievre on the spot and say, are you going to take that back from Canadians? So I think, in the grander scheme of things, I think that's maybe where the Liberals are going, and maybe for that rationale. But I agree with Joël-Denis. I don't think it's because we would be proroguing because the Prime Minister would be stepping down.
Okay. Well, we watch, and of course, if it happens, I'm going to invite you back. Bob Fife, Catherine Lévesque, Joël-Denis Bellavance, thank you very much.
Have a great Thanksgiving weekend.
Thanksgiving. To the U.S. now, where Americans have just 24 days left to cast a ballot, choosing who their representatives will be, including their next president. Now, polls, they do continue to suggest the race remains tight, with any lead for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump falling within the margins of error of all polls conducted. Still, the numbers are exposing one interesting trend: the gender divide in voting intentions. It's something we talked about with Emerson College polling on our program this week, and something we dug into a bit deeper with Luiza Savage from Politico. So, Luiza, as we follow this campaign, what seems to be getting clearer is the fact that there's this gender divide emerging, where more women are more likely to say that they will vote Democrat, more men likely to say they will vote Republican. Talk to us about this gender divide.
Michael, it's really intense, and it's bigger than what we've seen in a series of the last few presidential elections. We've seen a survey this month from Times Siena polling showing that Harris is up 16 points with women and Trump is up 11 with men. And what's so interesting is that this gap persists across geographies, across income and education levels. In the key swing states, we see in some places Harris up 20 points with women. And both of the campaigns seem to be really leaning into this gap, with Harris trying to consolidate men and Trump really going after the male vote.
Okay, well, let's talk about Trump right now. Why is the Trump campaign resonating more with men? What are you hearing on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we just finished a deep dive podcast here at Politico with Sarah Longwell, who's a Republican strategist, and she's done a lot of focus groups on this. And my takeaway from that long podcast is basically three things. One, it's the Trump persona. He comes off as this kind of funny, risk-taking, successful businessman, and there are a lot of guys who just like that persona. He surrounds himself with beautiful women, with beautiful things, and that appeals to a lot of people. But the second is a much more calculated move on Trump's part, and that is kind of aligning himself with what's being called the manosphere. And this is all the blogs, the streamers, the podcasts by male influencers talking about how to be masculine, how to be a man, sometimes veering into misogyny or anti-feminist messages. This is something that's been cultivated by his son, Don Jr., for a while now. And it's interesting that his running mate, J.D. Vance, has also spent a lot of time on these shows and really aligned himself with that whole conversation. And then thirdly, one big driver of the gender gap is abortion. The dismantling of Roe v. Wade under Trump has really driven a lot of women, including Republican women, away from Trump and exacerbated that divide.
Okay, so you hinted at it off top, but talk to us a bit more about it. How does that then inform the two campaigns? How are they trying to solidify their bases and build on it?
Right, so in the big picture, it's interesting, right, Michael, that in 2016, Trump chose Mike Pence as his running mate to really appeal to the more conservative, old-fashioned, socially conservative, Christian, religious part of the party. And this time, he made the choice of J.D. Vance, who's really, as I said, really more in that sort of tech bro, finance bro, sort of manosphere culture. And they're really cultivating that. And Trump is going on those shows. Vance is spending a lot of time there. It's something that Donald Trump's son is a part of that scene. We all have heard the comments that J.D. Vance made about childless cat ladies and the uses of, quote, postmenopausal women. So it's this sort of cultural divide that they're playing into. And you saw him lean into that hyper-masculinity at the convention, where he had Hulk Hogan tearing off his shirt. And now he's using Elon Musk, who's coming out and campaigning for him in Pennsylvania and other key places. And he's also kind of appealing to that tech bro culture. So the Trump campaign is really leaning hard into this notion. And it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I mean, if they feel that they're losing women, then they have to double down on men. But one interesting footnote is that young men especially are less likely to vote than young women. So it'll be really interesting to see if Trump succeeds in what he's done in the past, which is getting those low propensity voters out voting for him for the first time.
And that was Luiza Savage from Politico. Now, our conversation was actually a bit longer. We also dug into what the parties are doing to respond to this gender divide. To see the full conversation, go to our website, cpac.ca, or check out our YouTube channels. And that is our last program for this week. Parliament will not be sitting next week, so we'll see you again when MPs get back on October the 21st. Until then, I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC and Primetime Politics, thank you for watching. Have a very happy and safe Thanksgiving.